Confined Space Entry Requirements Training. Agenda. What is a confined space? Reasons for entering a confined space. Pre-confined space procedures, what is required before entering, and a rough timeline of procedures leading up to entry. This online awareness training of GrassCan's confined space entry procedures does not replace confined space training by your union or the IHSA. What is a confined space? A confined space is defined as a fully or partially enclosed space that is not both designed and constructed for continuous human occupancy and in which atmospheric hazards may occur because of its construction, location, or contents, or because of the work that is done in it. Examples: storage tanks, sewer lines, utility chambers, open-top spaces such as pits. Reasons for entering a confined space. GrassCan related. Inspection and maintenance of equipment and machinery. Checking and reading meters, gauges, dials, charts, and other indicators. Repair work including welding operations. Maintenance activities such as abrasive blasting or application of paints or other coatings. Installing, inspecting, repairing, and replacing valves, piping, pumps, motors, etc. in underground vaults and pits. Cleaning activities to remove sludge and other waste materials. What is required? Prior to confined space entry, there are multiple steps that need to be followed before personnel can enter and work in a confined space. These steps are essential to performing the job and are needed to keep all parties safe. Within this training module, we will give brief descriptions to the various forms needed to perform a confined space entry, and as well give a rough timeline to when these forms need to be done prior to confined space entry. Forms. All the above forms are needed prior to entry into any confined space, and can be done any time leading up to the day of the event in question. However, some information gathered from certain forms is needed to complete other forms. Procedures. Training confirmation form. Training must be completed by the individual worker before they can be considered eligible to enter a confined space. Once appropriate training has been completed, a checklist with all the workers' training, confined space training confirmation form, will be placed in a file of eligible trained workers with all their qualifications checked off. Supervisors may only utilize those workers who have completed the training. Just before entry commences, a list of all personnel who are eligible to work in the confined space should be completed. Procedures continued. Confined Space Hazard Assessment. The Confined Space Hazard Assessment Form is a hazard identification and risk assessment specifically for a confined space. The document is pre-populated with several potential risks that are common to confined space work. Other pertinent information required are job tasks and the time frame in which to do it, frequency of entry into the confined space, and number of entry points. Hazard assessment continued. In confined spaces, hazards may exist as a result of the design, construction, location, or use of the contents of the space. They may also develop during the work activity inside the confined space. These hazards may be atmospheric hazards and/or physical hazards. Risk assessment. Risk assessment is used to identify the hazards associated with the confined space and high-risk tasks performed there, and aims to implement the applicable safety means and techniques. In addition to the identification work, this step is necessary to provide a safe rescue plan in case of an emergency. The assessment increases the awareness of workers on the risk associated with their work environment. Procedures continued. On-site rescue plan. The on-site rescue plan form states everything needed to perform a rescue of a worker or workers who are working in a confined space. It lists who is the designated rescuer or rescuers, the methods of communication, method of rescue to use, and equipment used in the rescue. This can be filled out as late as the day of. However, all identified essentials must be on site prior to entry. There is room for a diagram on page 3 if needed. Rescue equipment. The rescue equipment identified in the relevant plan is readily available to effect a rescue in the confined space, appropriate for entry into the confined space, inspected and recorded in writing as often as is necessary to ensure it is in good working order by a person with adequate knowledge, training, and experience. Grasscan now rents confined space rescue equipment from Premier Safety. They can be reached at 905-858-2283. Attendant. An attendant must be stationed outside the confined space before a worker may enter a confined space, and must be able to communicate with the entrant throughout the entire entry, must have a radio, cell phone, or air horn to summon help in accordance with the plan, must never enter the confined space in order to facilitate a rescue. The person who fulfilled the role of attendant may enter the space only if he or she is replaced by another competent attendant. The role change must be documented on the permit. Procedures continued. Site-specific plan. The site-specific plan form is done in conjunction with the on-site rescue plan. This form lists those hazards identified in the assessment, the names and the duties of those employees entering into or attending the confined space. This also acts as a checklist regarding essentials such as, but not limited to, PPE, entry-exit procedures, ventilation and purging, hot work, and on-site rescue. Site-specific plan continued. Site-specific continued. Take a time to look at the form and go over all the categories listed on the form. Procedures continued. Confined space atmospheric testing. The atmospheric testing form is to record the atmosphere prior to and constantly during work in a confined space. Information on this form includes instrument information such as type, calibration method, and serial number, as well as who conducted the tests. Information from this form should also be recorded on the confined space permit. Confined space permit. The confined space permit form is an administrative tool used to document the completion of the various forms for each confined space entry. Someone fully trained and experienced in confined space work should complete the entry permit. Before entering a confined space, an entry permit should be written. It should contain or have attached to it the following information: the length of time the permit is valid for, the name of the workers or workers that are authorized to enter the confined space, the name of the attendants, attendees, safety watch and/or supervisor, the location and description of the confined space, the work that is to be done in the confined space. Confined space permit continued. Possible hazards that may be encountered inside and outside the space, the date and time of entry into the confined space and the anticipated time of exit, the details of any atmospheric testing done of the confined space, hazard control measures including the use of mechanical ventilation and other protective equipment needed, and any other precautions that will be followed by every worker who is going to enter the confined space. Confined space permit continued. Means of communication between the persons working in the confined space and the attendant, emergency plan and the protective equipment and emergency equipment to be used by any person who takes part in a rescue or responds to other emergency situations in the confined space. Authorization signature by the supervisor certifying that the space has been properly evaluated, prepared, and is safe for entry and work. Confined space permit continued. The permit can have the majority of the information completed within a few days up to and few hours prior to entry. However, atmospheric testing must be done the day of, just before entry. The results recorded onto the permit itself, as well as on the atmospheric testing form. The entry permit should be available at the confined space and remain so until the work is completed. GrassCan will keep a copy of the completed permit on file for a minimum of 1 year. Procedures continued. Confined space coordination document. The coordination document only needs to be filled out if and when there are subcontractors that share the work in a confined space. This document will have the name, title, employer information, as well as pertinent information such as location and permit number. Procedures continued. Confined space inventory. In certain confined spaces, leaving something behind can be detrimental to the confined space's function, such as industrial fans. The confined space inventory form keeps track of all tools and equipment going in and out of a confined space. This log sheet should contain all tools and equipment being utilized in the confined space and should be checked off prior to exiting the confined space at the end of the job task. Timeline. "24 hours prior to entry, Training records must be complete for anyone who is to work in the confined space. 12 to 24 hours prior, fill out rescue plan and site-specific confined space plan. Also, fill out confined space hazard assessment form. Prior to entry, begin filling out information on the confined space permit checklist. If subcontractors are entering as well, fill out the coordination document. 15 to 30 minutes prior, complete confined space permit by adding atmospheric test results and post at the site. Fill out the inventory list prior to entry. Atmospheric testing form to be done prior to entry, during entry. Once the form is complete and entry has finished, submittal of confined space documents to the Health and Safety Department. Thank you. For further information or direction, contact the Health and Safety Department.